realized how powerful it was to listen to a person. And in recent months, I've been working on a paper trying to take a fresh look at the power of listening, at the power of an empathic way of being. And that's what I want to talk to you about.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of Needy. It's probably not the first time that you hear about how important it is to listen to people. You might have attended a communication training organized by your work or your organization, and you learned how to actively listen by paraphrasing the other person's words. If so, you might have noticed that for some days after, all your colleagues became like parrots, repeating everything you were saying, which can be pretty annoying. Although, I guess after some time, things turned back to normal and nobody really listens to each other, and this shows us that there seems to be a mismatch here between theory and practice. So I'm dedicating this episode to the question, how do we become better communicators without turning into parrots? How can we communicate authentically? So make yourself comfortable, get yourself a cup of tea or coffee, and let's begin. Needy, a podcast about compassionate communication and applied improv. How can we be better communicators without coming across as mindless robots, parroting our favorite communication toolkits? I want to approach this question by talking about mindset. Mindset trumps standard communication toolkits. These kind of toolkits you can find anywhere, online, in a book, or even in a podcast. Sure, they might tell you the right thing to say, to negotiate a higher salary, or how to deliver negative feedback to a member of your team. But in my experience, they don't take you that one step further and tell you how and why you should do it that way. That is what I'm referring to when I talk about mindset. So let me explore this a little further. Imagine you want to give critical feedback to somebody and you go into it with the mindset of wanting to destroy this person. In this moment, any humanistic communication method is useless. Of course, you can actively listen to whatever the person has to say, paraphrasing the words, nodding here and there. But in the end, let's face it, it's useless because if you clearly have little to zero respect for the other person, they will most likely notice that you're playing a game. Mindset is always stronger than your perceived degree of control over our words and actions. Do you remember the voice you heard at the beginning of this episode? The voice belongs to Carl Rogers, an American psychologist. It was a quote from a famous lecture he gave in 1974, and the topic was the power of empathy within a conversation between therapists and their clients. You can find this lecture on YouTube, and I will put the link in the show notes. So, Carl Rogers really did some groundwork in shaping the humanistic school of psychology, and his findings were influential even beyond his field, and they're used to this day in multiple communication methods. I want to play you another part of his lecture where he talks about his research and his learnings on how to build an empathetic relationship with a client.
So, in such a context of learning, it became quite natural that we focused upon the content of the therapist's response rather than upon the empathic quality of the listening. I no longer particularly apologize for that. It probably was a necessary step in our learning. To this extent, we became very much conscious of the techniques that the counselor or therapist was using. We became really expert in analyzing in minute detail. I can remember sitting around with students and picking apart sentences and particular phrases and words. And we profited a great deal from that very microscopic study of the interview process. I think we gained a great deal from it. But this tendency to focus on the therapist's responses had consequences which appalled me. I was meeting considerable hostility as to my point of view, and that really didn't seem to bother me. But this kind of thing did bother me, because the whole approach came in a few years to be known as a technique.
Right. What can we learn from this? Even Carl Rogers had to learn that the focus on words and actions within a human interaction, in his case, a conversation between a therapist and his client, is misleading. His point is, and he was really the first one who pointed this out, his point is that it is not the method which makes a conversation successful, but rather the attitude of the person who is using the method. I strongly believe that this principle also applies to Marshall Rosenberg's model of nonviolent communication, which I mentioned briefly in my last episode and which will become more and more central in the next episodes. Interestingly, Marshall Rosenberg was also a student of Carl Rogers' research, and far too often Rosenberg's model is taught as a communication method alone, like a tool which emphasizes the correct or incorrect use of words. Well, and I think the model has more to offer than this. Without the according mindset, any method tastes dry and bland. One could say that mindset brings flavor to any kind of human interaction. Communication is only authentic and coherent when mindset, actions, and the words go hand in hand. So if you parrot words which are counterintuitive to your feelings, most people will see right through it. They could stop trusting you and almost certainly won't take you seriously. So again, the point I want to make is that I believe that nonviolent words simply don't exist. There's only such a thing as a nonviolent mindset. Let me give you an example. The other day I met a good friend for a run in the park, and he forgot his keys at home and was quite annoyed with himself. I said something like, "Oh, you're such an idiot." Is this violent language? Well, it probably would be judged as rude by many people. However, my friend was not offended at all. Why? Well, as friends, we are usually friendly with each other. We tend to have an open and understanding attitude towards each other. So when I called him an idiot, he actually heard something like, "Oh dear, I'm sorry for you." There's obviously enough trust between us that he would assume that I actually empathize with his pain. I want to come back to Carl Rogers' lecture one last time and play you a section where he talks about his definition of empathy.
I'd like to attempt a description of empathy which would seem satisfactory to me today. I would no longer be terming it a state of empathy, which was in my earlier definition, because I believe it to be a process rather than a state, and perhaps I can capture that quality. The way of being with another person, which is termed empathic, has several facets. It means entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. It involves being sensitive moment to moment to the changing felt meanings which flow in this other person, to the fear or rage or tenderness or confusion or whatever that he or she is experiencing. It means temporarily living in his life, moving about in it delicately, without making judgments, sensing meanings of which he is scarcely aware, but not trying to uncover feelings of which he is totally unaware, since this would be too threatening. It includes communicating your sensings of his world as you look with fresh and unfrightened eyes at elements of which he is fearful. It means frequently checking with him as to the accuracy of your sensings and being guided by his responses. You are a confident companion to him in his world. By pointing to the possible meanings in the flow of his or her experiencing, you help him to focus on this useful type of referent, to experience his meanings more fully and to move forward in his or her experiencing.
Listening to this makes me question why communication is often regarded as a soft skill, when for me it's just as critical to life as being able to read and write. When it comes to empathy, Rogers encourages the unconditional acceptance of whatever is going on in the other person's mind. It is quite a tough task and definitely isn't an easy one. This unconditional acceptance is an ideal that Marshall Rosenberg incorporated into his method and something that is critical to the development of a nonviolent mindset. So let's come back to our initial question. How can we be better communicators? Becoming truly empathetic is not something that happens overnight. And yes, there are limits. There are certain situations where we still be unable to be truly empathetic. And if we try and pretend, people will see through it. Why can't we empathize with people in certain situations? In the next few episodes, I will talk more about the Rosenberg model of nonviolent communication and the learning curve of empathy on the path to this nonviolent or empathetic mindset. Just remember, mindset trumps method. Alright, I think that's enough for today and talk to you next time. I'm looking forward to it. Take care, Jakob.